Beautiful Anonymous changes each week. It defies genres and expectations. For example, our most recent episode, I talked to a woman who survived a murder attempt by her own son. But just the week before that, we just talked the whole time about Star Trek. We've had other recent episodes about sexting in languages that are not your first language, or what it's like to get weight loss surgery. It's unpredictable, it's real, it's honest, it's raw. Get Beautiful Anonymous wherever you listen to podcasts.
What's up, friends? Mark here. If you are a regular, you know I'm all about powerful questions and mental fitness. So I wanted to let you all know that my book is currently on sale. That's Personal Socrates, and it doesn't go on sale that often. You can use the code UPGRADE20 over at baronfig.com for 20% off through May and June. I put the details in the show notes as well. Thanks as always for being here, and I appreciate you. Now enjoy this week's episode. Welcome everyone to another episode of Behind the Human. I'm your host, Mark Champagne, and it's my job to unpack the stories and mental fitness practices of people living at the top of their game personally and professionally. We have what I'll just describe as a really special episode with a remarkable human being, someone I feel great to be able to call a friend, co-host, and for all of you who have listened to any of the Demystifying Psychedelics episodes, this is Paul, the co-host on that show, and it's time to bring him on the main show, Behind the Human, and unpack his journey and his wisdom and all of the wild and beautiful things he's been doing. So a little bit of background about Paul M. Vincent. He's a seasoned expert in human performance with over 2 decades of experience in health, fitness, and behavioral science. His unique perspective is shaped by a master's in human performance, ongoing PhD research in psychedelic therapy, and extensive study of indigenous cultures and Taoism. Paul, welcome to the show. It feels weird to even say that because you're always behind the mic with me.
I know, but I feel so privileged to be on this show. Like I finally earned my stripes to get here.
Hardly, but okay, I'll take that. Hardly. There's no earning of stripes. This has been, well, it's been a long time in the making because I think, we've been working on the other series, and
Right.
as you know, of course, and I think some listeners will resonate, it's taken us a bit of time to figure out how to release that, and we've been, trying to be somewhat strategic in really how these shows intertwine and so forth, but finally got to the point where we're like, okay, it's time to release the series and so forth, which then I think freed up the opportunity to bring you on and have a proper, I say proper, but we've had so many of these chats in different capacities, but a real true kind of behind the human chat. So I am so excited. And also, I think the timing is really good. Knowing the work that you're just coming out of and the experiences you've just had with the program on the psychedelic side of things, and also my side as I've been starting this book research. There's so many questions I have about that as well that I think you'd be really helpful for. So before we get into all of that, I mean, you have an idea of this question that everyone gets to start off the show, and I'm very curious to hear your response because I imagine it's evolved and changed over and over again over the last probably year or 2 years, knowing the work that you've done. And that question is, as of today, who are you?
Yeah.
How many times have you asked that question in the last
Well,
24
it gets
months?
a bit weird, and I don't know if we're going to get weird right off the bat.
Oh, there's no rules here.
The question has evolved. Not who am I, but what am I?
Ooh, yeah.
And the who, I'm getting to know pretty well, and I've got to keep an eye on this who that lives in my head, right?
Yeah.
And that the more I get to know the who, the more it leads me to the what.
Wow. Okay. So let's just dumb it down. Like what's the distinction for you on the who and the what?
So it's there's many words now that are used for this, and there's as words become familiar, they lose a lot of their power or mystery. But I think you could say a consciousness. It's like it can be as simple as, if I shout hello in my head, I can hear the hello. So there's the
Yeah.
shouting and the hearing. So it can be as simple as just which part of me is aware that that voice is saying hello, you know?
Yeah.
But if I was to go a little bit further, I would say it's a different atmosphere and
Mm.
an energy, and you can actually, it's tangible. Anyone at any time can feel it. It's not that, someone special that gets there. There are techniques and stuff, but it's a sensation. I wouldn't say feeling, because feelings are emotional, right? They're in the animal, but that's why atmosphere is a word I'm using now. It's
Okay.
a different atmosphere. Mhm.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna keep pulling on this as we go through the conversation. But I'll just to help listeners with some backstory. How did you get to this point? I guess like what's the short version of what led you to? I suspect many chapters of your life where you were asking the who am I question and building
Mm.
a lot of those self-awareness muscles and reflective practices and so forth. And then that eventually led to, a shift in your life where you embarked on this work that you're making me you're making me think like I've got to question, or I've got to question the opening question of the show moving forward. But I don't think most people are ready for the what am I question. So yeah, where did it all begin?
Well, I got here. I mean, the answer I just came to my head was I got here kicking and screaming. You know,
Mm,
it's
yeah.
like I kept going in a direction with my life, and life kept taking me in a different direction. And then I was getting frustrated at life that it wasn't going in the direction I wanted it to go. Not that I didn't have achievements and success, but my life kept folding in on itself and twisting and
How
turning.
so?
In terms of, like, I probably went through maybe 3 major identity crises already in my
Okay.
life.
Yeah.
Like, one is example, like I was an athlete at some point,
Yeah.
and then I wasn't an athlete. And then I'm like, well, who am I if I'm not an athlete? And it's the crisis of it. Like, that's how people know me. Are they not going to like me anymore? Like, who am I? So
Yeah.
those things is why I say kind of folded in on itself, because I had to go through this, these changes. But there was always something, like a through line, like pulling me, that I was like, it was like I had my hands over my ears, like trying not to hear it, but it
Mm,
was always leading me. So it was always there, but I couldn't recognize it, and to me, it just showed up as like a pain in the ass. It's like,
yeah.
let me just achieve these things I want to achieve in my life. But it wasn't until later on in my life, after going through a lot of that turmoil, that I realized, oh, okay, that's what it is.
So what is it? What are you referring to? Like what was, I guess, what were the messages?
It's sort of this untangible path that I'm on now. That is that thing that is untangible, looking at it through a certain lens, but tangible in another way, right? Um, and so it's like it's got me to this point where I am in life. Like, an example is like, my PhD in psychedelic therapy. When I was an athlete, I was completely, and my whole life, I had the conditioning that drugs are bad and they'll scramble your brain. And
Yeah.
as an athlete, you don't put anything in your body that's bad, And I had fear about it. So if you'd asked me back in my life if I would even go near anything like this, I would say, no way. It was absolutely not possible.
Yeah.
And yet I can even say, I know how I found myself here, but I can also say I don't know how I found myself here. It's like
Sure.
I was led here. Like, it was such a random way for me to enter this program. It's not like I searched for a program. It was a very strange introduction, even
Mm.
getting onto this program.
So what just again so we can help set the context, you were an athlete that, and I'm obviously skipping a whole bunch of
Mm.
detail in between, but then you moved into, you were working with your brother, I believe,
Hmm. Hmm.
in training and helping primarily actors. Is that
Yeah, that was our main demographic. It was
okay?
sort of high achievers. Like, we work with a lot of professional athletes and executives from big companies,
Yeah.
but a lot
Paul
of
is
actors.
just for everyone listening, Paul is the most humble person you'll meet in his life. Like when you say big actors, we're talking like like the Tom Cruises of the world. I mean, like big actors. Just
Yeah.
I know I'm on a different plane of you. I'm probably still more materialistic or whatever it is, or working on labels. But I think it's just helpful to know, like, to set the context of where you were and where you've shifted to.
Mm,
People can understand that
mm.
world, right? So sorry to interrupt you, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's been like every step of my journey, I can now see kind of how it fits in, the value of it, because I went from, very firmly rooted in science, and I
Mm,
still am. And I went, through the health and wellness phase. I went through the entrepreneurial phase, and in COVID,
yeah,
I had to close my company. And that was another identity crisis. So I've been through these evolutions. And so I can understand them from a direct experience. And so I can utilize that now in the work I do, which is helping people in these transition times in their life. Not only or in times where they, they're looking for something a little bit deeper or different,
yeah,
because I've been through it,
yeah,
and I struggle through it. It's not like it was easy. I've been through struggles and I've been at the, edge of the cliff looking into the abyss, not knowing what's going to happen, and I came out the other side and I did it in a very different way than I would have done it early in my life or that I was taught to do it or told how to do it. So it was a scary journey, but I think I've learned a lot from going through it that way.
So then how what was the moment, or I'm sure there were many moments, but I guess the final piece, I guess, to the puzzle to pull you off of, let's just I don't know, maybe I can say kind of old Paul, or like the track that you were on that I think again a lot of people can resonate with. Like, you're makes sense, right? Like, you're an athlete, and now you're working with athletes and actors and perform high performers and so forth. And like, you're taking, what you learn obviously as an athlete, and then you layering on your
Mm.
education, and you're translating that over. Like, what in that period though, where did it not become enough, or where was it like there's something missing here?
You know, I could probably point to a few factors, but really, I think the most significant one was I struggled with mental health.
Mm,
I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, and it wasn't enjoyable.
mm,
Like, and I'm like, it was sort of like to get out of that. How can I overcome that? How can I make myself feel better? And as I kept looking at the causes and applying solutions, you get to a point where you sort of reach the end of what is provided.
mm.
And if you keep going, you enter a different realm. And that's when you get into the Taoist philosophies, into the indigenous philosophies. It's like it goes beyond sort of the current coping mechanisms that we have, that's common for us to deal with these things.
Okay. And then that's when the program essentially surfaced or started to present itself?
Yeah, there's been a few other things in my life. It's been like there's been this through line the whole way, but and I went through, like, I learned at one point when I was struggling with this in my 20s. um, I learned a lot of the psychology about the mind and mindset, and I was able to apply it to the athletes, about mindset, about vision, about all that stuff, and it was super helpful.
Yeah.
But it didn't last for me. They're amazing. Uh, uh, you know, I don't know what the word is, like, techniques, that
Techniques.
help people a lot. But to me, it didn't last, and that might be unique to me. But I was in this search for, you know, first of all, how just to help myself. But then I sort of I pushed at the walls too hard and they collapsed. And I'm like, oh, there's something beyond, you know?
Okay.
And so that's sort of like these constructs collapsed, you know?
So what at that time in your life then, like, what was it were there feelings of depression? Was it just
Mm.
feeling lost, or like what kind of questions, I guess, were you asking at that point in your life?
I went through very dark places, like even contemplation of like, do I even want to, be here anymore? It
Mm,
was like I've been to that edge. It's like, oh, just overwhelm. Like, It's as like the way, the perspective that this character we talked about, the Who, had of life was that it was a bit overwhelming, and I didn't really have the ability to survive it, you know.
Okay.
And so there was those moments, but I didn't. It's interesting. I didn't really know that that was something that was abnormal. You know, I just kind of, it's just like, oh, okay, everyone's surviving life kind of thing, and like I braced through it,
Yeah.
and a big turning point was, recognizing that I was bracing through life, and then recognizing how many other people were doing it and don't even know they're doing it. We have this like little tension we have inside that's, internal bracing, and you're not directly interacting with life. There's a little bit of fear of life, like, this might happen or that might happen. Whatever I'm scared of might happen. And so I'm going to prepare for it. I'm going to brace against it. And when I got that on a very deep level, that what am I protecting? Who am I protecting? And I could relax and start to, participate fully in life. Like, and then I'm like, I want everyone to have this. I want everyone to
Yeah.
see that there's a whole different paradigm.
Yeah. So what is the contrast to that? And we'll get into it more, but just as a bit of a tease, like what's the contrast to what you're describing that you have witnessed when you're spending time with indigenous cultures?
Hmm. It's I would say a lot of our culture, the modern Western culture, is about how to succeed in life, which you can also say how to survive life. Like if I achieve these things, if I get these things in my life, then I will be happy.
Yeah.
And they've sort of gone through it, it seems like, and they understand it's like, wait a minute, that's not the route to go.
Yeah.
That's very fear based. The hierarchy of our brain is fear based, right? Amygdala
Mhm.
driven, and they sort of recognize that. They're like, hey, there's a part of you that's scared.
Yeah.
Our DNA is coded with loneliness, right? We want to bond in a tribe, and they get that. And so they set up the structure of their culture in a way that doesn't allow these parts of us to take over their lives. They have
Mm.
stories about it, they have songs about it, and they have like they have stories about like these monsters in the forest that will get you and bite you and infect you. But really, they're talking about the ego. They know the
Yeah.
dangers of it. And so I got
Yeah.
to learn so much just from their perspective.
So is there a difference, or I guess what is the difference in kind of the daily operations of it? Because of just living and truly existing, and you have these, of course, the stories and like the monsters, because I'm trying to think of how we live, and it's like I could be having this conversation, and you obviously know the work that I do. There's a lot of practices and so forth, access to that and deploy it as much as possible. But then, just to stay with the analogy, the monsters come in and like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, there they are again. Some days I do a good job. I'm like, oh, hey guys, like, time to
Yeah.
leave. Like, we're gonna refocus here. But I wonder, and then other days where the monsters are taking over the party.
Absolutely.
But within these tribes and their cultures and so forth, it's not to say that there aren't struggles, of course.
Mm,
So
you're right.
it's like, how do they just see it differently? Like, how do they just operate daily within the mind? And
Mm,
maybe they're not operating within the mind. Maybe
mm,
that's the trick. Like, what have you noticed so
yeah.
that you don't fall into the
Mm,
craziness of the mind?
yeah. Yeah. And, I don't want to romanticize it either. It's, I just got back from Gabon and I was never been more excited to get back to my bed and my shower and my toilet.
Yeah.
It's a struggle in there, and there's things in there that go on in these tribes that we maybe wouldn't agree with. But what I see is that they have space in their culture, like a container that can handle all the messiness of a human, right?
Oh, well said.
So when I get, an emotion, a strong emotion, they handle it I don't have to suppress it. It comes out and they deal with it. They have a lot of practices to mitigate it or to prevent that stuff. Like,
Yeah.
we would say
Give us
like a
some examples.
catharsis. It's like here I might, I was working with an athlete, the other day that came to me and he's like, I was running and I almost teared up. And it was such a foreign thing to him. And, that would be great if he teared up, if
Yeah,
it was
yeah, yeah,
okay that he could tear up, but he's been a strong, fighting, proving
yeah.
himself. And they don't get to that point. They'll express, emotion, you know, whereas we might go out, they're arguing a lot, this tribe. They're really just expressing emotion. They're getting it out, whereas we would
Mhm.
hold it in,
Interesting.
and be polite. But we're in a different context. Like we're in a tribe of a few thousand people, right? So we can't go out in the street and shout, you know.
Yeah.
So we have to have other practices. But there's things like that. They also, you know, we've had this big in the last few years thing about getting into nature and how healthy nature is. They know that, they live in nature. So they're like, I asked one of the elders in the tribe, one time, hey, he visits, the Western culture. I'm like, hey, do you like it? He's like, no, I can't wait to get back to, my forest, because we're intra beings. We're connected directly
Yeah.
to nature. When I inhale, I'm sucking oxygen from plants.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
exhale and the trees absorb my carbon dioxide. I'm directly in contact with them.
Yeah.
We've sort of forgotten that. So there's things that are just in their way they live that keep them grounded, that help them get through the messiness of being a human. It's no
Mm.
more simple from them. They still have all the stuff that goes on, maybe not to certain degrees, but they have container that can handle it.
Yeah. That I like that that visual, like just establishing and setting up a container to do that. Because I
Mm,
think for me, I'm always trying to think like in present day and the way that we live and so forth. Like what's within my direct control, and if I think of my
mm,
family unit, we could have some influence on our container. I'm just thinking of my direct, like my wife and two young boys, and like establishing a safe and welcoming container, and trying to
mm,
pull from some of these insights and learnings from other cultures to kind
yeah.
of equip them with the tools
Hmm.
of to be able to to live a fulfilling life, whatever that definition is for them
Yeah.
when they get to that age.
Hmm.
The The other thing that kinda came to mind as you're sharing was, and we've talked about this before on the other show, but I think it's worth re-mentioning it, is just it strikes me that you experience these different cultures, and they have a much, I wanna say, much more sophisticated and higher view of how life actually works, or,
Mm,
like, from an energetic perspective that, when you have a good belief system, or when you have, like, a belief in a higher power of some sort, that that in itself just often lightens the mind. And
mm,
from the stories you've shared with me in the past, like, why don't we just start there? I mean, I remember you, and I'll just set a bit of context. I remember you said one of your earlier experiences was where you were being welcomed into a group, and the condition was, you have to leave your modern day science, and I say that in air
mm,
quotes,
mm,
behind, because
mm,
what you may experience here, like, there is no language for that in your
mm.
community, I guess you can say.
Yeah, it was even more than language. Like it took me a while to fully understand. So this tribe, they
Okay.
came in, and I arrived in their territory, and they said, "Hey, if you want to learn what we have to teach, you have to let go of your system of logic and science, because
Mhm.
what we teach is outside of that realm." And
Yeah,
at the
and
time, I'm like, "Well,
you were a science guy.
completely."
Yeah,
I'm like, "Well, what's outside of that? There's nothing outside of that. Like, what are you talking
yeah,
about?" And I saw things that I can't explain, and they
yeah,
showed me things that I can't explain. When I started to understand quantum physics, I
mm,
started to understand a little bit better. And if you think about like the double split theory, right? That the it's a particle or a wave depending on if it's observed or not observed. It hasn't become what's expected of it yet.
Yeah.
So if I have an expectation that things happen logically in a scientific method, then they happen in that method, right?
Mm.
So we are creating the context and validating it, right?
Yeah.
Where they're like, look, we don't validate that same thing, so we can operate. They're operating in the quantum field with the wave of a feather, you know,
Yeah.
and they're
Yeah.
doing stuff that I'm like, I don't know how you did that. In my context, that's not possible, right?
Yeah.
A has to lead to B and to lead to C, and this has how it works. But is it like that because I'm causing it to be like that, as if I'm observing it with an expectation?
Yeah. It's fast. So I have to ask you to share any of the experiences because and not from a not from like a clickbait perspective because
Mm,
this is stuff obviously you can't explain it. It sounds very interesting. I asked that question because I know for me personally, ever since the first time I met you and you shared some of these experiences, they have never left my mind and they always remind me of, well, wait a second. They're cues of we don't have it all figured out. In fact,
mm,
we're very far from that. And if you can remain just curious and open,
mm,
it's a beautiful way to go through life. And
mm,
I don't know if I've ever told you that, but I have obviously you to thank for unlocking that piece in myself where as someone who interviews a lot of people and has curiosity, at the forefront, of course, through the questions, it's just unlocked a whole other level of curiosity
mm.
for myself that is such a gift, Paul. So
Oh, mate,
I hope we can
that's
give that to some other people listening.
yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Um, what was the question?
Yeah, well, just are there
Sorry, mate.
I mean, I can prompt you with a couple that I remember on my side, but are there any examples that come to mind from the early days or even present days
Mm,
where you're like, I can't I can't explain that,
yeah.
but you experienced
No.
something?
Yeah, yeah. Give me a couple of prompts of the ones that you remember. So, because
Yeah, there's the flute
yes, okay,
as one. What was the other one? There was the Aztecs, I think, as well.
okay,
But that was just like I think a story. But the
yeah,
flute one, I think you
yeah,
experienced that one directly.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Okay, yeah, yeah, I got it. Okay, um, yeah. Going back to that, idea of things that are inexplicable, right? Through my typical context. There was one story that I feel okay sharing. Like a lot of this is it's mystery, right? And mystery, all it
yeah,
means is we haven't been able to validate it through our methods yet. So it's beyond that. So it's mysterious, which I think is a good thing, to keep mystery, you
mhm,
know. And I can explain that a little bit more afterwards why I have that
yeah,
distinction. But I remember with one tribe there was a group of us, 40 of us there. We were all part of this program. And we were there, to learn from the tribe, to learn their healing practices, and to get to know them a little bit more. And every evening, there was this one shaman who would, there would be flute music. And we'd all listen to it, we'd all discuss it, like amongst my group. We're like, oh, that's beautiful. Let's listen tonight. And I remember after a few days, we got to talk to them. And someone asked, oh, what kind of flute do you play? And the shaman looked at us and he's like, I don't have a flute. We're like, every one of us heard a flute.
yeah.
There's no mistaking. We heard a flute. And he's like, oh, that's my spiritual flute. My spirit guide is teaching me how to play the spiritual flute. So it's taken me a long time. It's taken me 20 years to learn how to play it, but it's not a physical flute. And I'm like, oh,
I don't know. Where's the
physical
flute?
flute don't exist. What do you mean? I heard it with my physical ears.
Yeah,
So those things that like, and that's just one example. I've seen other things that are inexplicable where, they do this healing, a different tribe does this healing, and where you have pain, emotional, physical, they do this ritual and then they, suck something out of you and they
yeah.
spit into their hands what they sucked out of you, which now is a physical thing. And we
Wow.
look at it and it's like, wait, is that glass or a little stones? Like, and then they'll just read it, look at it, understand it, and throw it away. And to me, that's like, how do they do that? That's not supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's like, it's things that are just, I don't want to go, oh, that's, because I don't understand it, to judge it, and it took me a
Yeah. That's the
while
key.
to
Yeah.
let go, because it's like, okay, yeah, there may be things I don't know. Like in our Western world, in our science, we're constantly discovering things that we didn't know before, and then we have to, recategorize everything. And
Yeah.
so, we're getting closer now in the quantum field to understand how or what they're doing. So it would be naive to go in and go and just have with disbelief. And so I had to
Yeah.
be very open initially, but now I start to understand what they're doing and how they're doing it, and that mystery.
Yeah. So why don't you talk a little bit more about the importance of mystery?
Yeah. So, you know, I I started to with these. I was very lucky from an early age in my 20s to start connecting with indigenous cultures, and to start understanding, to see that they were operating differently, and they work in the mystery. They work in things like I just described, that are inexplicable at the moment to us.
Mm. But it's
But
not
has also
is it a mystery to them? It almost feels
no,
like yeah, it almost feels like just that this is kind of par for the course. This is how we live.
yes, but it's a different paradigm, you could say, to just the physical world.
Okay.
You know, another little story. Like I was with a tribe also, and they're like, hey, you can set up your hammocks here where we could stay, but you can't go over to this spot because that's where the invisible people live. I'm like, invisible people?
Yeah.
I didn't know there was such a thing as invisible people. But then I remembered like a few other tribes that they talked about something like that, but they called it the forest people. Like we would go onto certain indigenous territories, and they would paint our face with certain geometric shapes, and they're like, oh, that's we're showing the forest people that we're friendly.
Okay.
They're like, that's the jewelry they wear, and that's what, how they look. And so there's these through lines that happened in tribes that are completely disconnected geographically, but have the same context. I
Yeah.
was with another tribe up a mountain, in Colombia, and they were doing this ritual with me, and there was three elders there, and they're doing this ritual, and they would clap and make like an echo sound, and all of them simultaneously turned and looked in the forest.
Wow.
No sound I could hear came out of the forest, and they turned and looked, waited a little bit as if they got a signal back, and then they turned to me and carried on with their ritual. And so I started to connect the dots. I'm like, wait, I've seen they've alluded to these things in other
Yeah.
other experiences I've had. So they understand the mystery, but they understand it as separate,
Yeah.
right?
Because it's not a
It's
fit. Have you ever had a conversation further about this? Like is it just an energy that they sense, or do they physically see something that we don't see?
they physically see something we don't see, but you can
Interesting.
see it.
Yeah.
You can see it. But then, so
Have you
along
ever seen
with
it,
this,
Paul?
I've seen things. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, keep going, keep going. We're gonna get part 2, I knew it. Okay.
um, there's another. So I was trying to recontextualize my
Yeah,
understanding of life, of reality, and simultaneously I was very privileged to get introduced to a master teacher in Taoism,
okay.
really in what they call in Taoism the way, right?
Yeah.
It's also in Buddhism, Hinduism. It's that Eastern philosophy.
Mhm.
And so at first I wasn't understanding like how they fit together. And this actually might be my dissertation, is these paradigms, because each culture, when they enter the mystery, whether it's with a medicine, what they call medicine, a psychedelic or something, and you shift, they enter different paradigms. Even some go into spiritual warfare, right? They're battling in these other paradigms. But when you go to the Eastern, they go to peace and love, right? And
Yeah.
so, why I started to get clear about the difference with mystery and not mystery. It's not that it's mysterious and it's out there and we can't contact it. It's with the typical way I function in this paradigm can't go there, right?
Yeah.
So if we look at what is reality, if I ask you what's reality, you might go, I ask you if a tree is real, right? You go, yeah, I can see it, I can touch it. There's maybe even a smell that comes off it. I can smell it, and you might want to have a bite of it and taste it. But you'd use your senses, right? Now we know our senses are limited, right? I can only see what reflects light. I can only hear certain decibels. The colors I can see, the spectrum is, from ultraviolet to infrared. We can only see a very small wavelength in the piece in the middle of their wavelength. So we know my sense is limited, but yet to me as the Paul, right, that's reality. So anything beyond that is mysterious. Looking at it through the lens of Paul, the human Paul, right? So anything outside of that is mysterious. It doesn't mean you can't experience it. You can experience it just without the same measure of your senses, right?
Yeah.
So then they're working in that realm. So to them, it's another part of them. Like I mentioned, that atmosphere, right? We call our personality or our ego, we say it's an identity, right? We've identified with this character in our head, our neurology or neurosis, right? That developed out of, in psychology, they say you're the sum total of all your lived experiences, right? Which is true in that context. But there might be another context that aligns with it simultaneously but separately. And that's the same with when you get into Taoism. They say you can identify with the part of you that lives through death, right? But from one context, it's like nothing lives through death. I die. My body dies. This personality dies. In religion, they might have some description of it with a soul or something like that. But in Taoism, they go, you can experience both simultaneously. That awareness I was talking about, you can be the awareness and the physical, right? I can have an emotion, I can have fear simultaneously from being aware I'm having fear. The awareness is not having fear. The awareness is aware of the fear. But they happen simultaneously. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding when people try. They don't understand it's only which lens you're looking at it through. Through the lens of Paul, of my senses, that's mysterious. From the other part, the awareness of that, it is that. That's what it is. There's no mystery in it. Yeah, there's no mystery. And that's aware of Paul, right? So it's, I mean, it might sound strange to be thinking of yourself in separate parts, but most people have experienced that. They just didn't know their experience. Like a buzzword for it now is flow, being in a flow state,
Sure.
And we just haven't contextualized it. Whereas in these cultures, they have, and they understand, there's maybe two contexts happening simultaneously, and that's the difference.
When you say flow, this made me think about this when you said flow state, but like, is it because, in today, in the Western world, obviously, there's just very little opportunity for our mind to actually be still. And our mind is just racing and running narratives and all this kind of stuff. And if I think of a flow state, usually that is, that is not there because if you're in an athletic flow state, you're so tuned in to, let's say, downhill skiing, or, you're in that flow of performance and, I guess, essentially survival as well. And so everything else is left there, or has gone. So is it when you're within the tribes and so forth, and the shamans, is it that they're living in that state more than us, or they're living in kind of almost like if I think of a lot of the Eastern philosophy, like no mind land?
We got to go back to two things can exist simultaneously. So we can look at a flow state through the Western model, right? What happens neurologically, and as we know, the amygdala operates faster than the rational part of the brain, right? That's why you might jump back, not knowing if you're going to step on a stick or a snake. So it takes over. And people who talk about these extreme, like, accidents, they fall off a cliff, they say it happened in slow motion. Really, it happened at the speed of the amygdala. We're just not used to the speed of the amygdala, right? So that's true. That happens. In a flow state, if I'm skiing, I'm just focused. there's part of my brain that's analyzing all the possible risks or thinking about what I should have for lunch. It's not there because I'm in this focused state. That's one lens to look at it through, right?
Mm.
But then if you go to no mind, right, into that Eastern philosophy, it's the awareness, right, which is, it's a little different than just looking at it through what's happening neurologically. But we have studied these deep meditators, these monks, and looked at, okay, when they're in that state of awareness, what happens to their brain? And so one affects the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in that state, there's also another phenomenon, right? That is, it's like where I'm using my brain, I'm logically figuring something out. And I'm doing it through the context of what is existing in my brain, my beliefs, right? Any decision we make, right? I can make a short-term decision, which is both based on my emotions, right? Like judges in cases, there's a very different outcome if they've had lunch or not had lunch, right? They're a lot more lenient if they've just had lunch, right?
Yeah,
so that's short-term decisions. Long-term decisions, what I have to do is I have to rationalize it in my head, but I rationalize it through my existing beliefs.
Which is what I'm doing with
my
my questions to you.
Yes, which I'll rustle around with them until they either fit or don't fit with existing belief, which means I can never make a new decision, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like a jigsaw piece. It's like, should I do this? Well, if I do this, it'll do that. I'm going back and forth, but I'm going back and forth when it already's there. It's not new.
Yeah.
It's not fresh, right? So that happens in that context, right? And they can only get one outcome. Now, in this other state, what people might describe it as is like, I just knew the answer. Einstein talks about this, right? He gets stuck on a problem. He goes, takes a nap. Well, what happened in the nap, right? He wasn't in his rational brain, his logical brain. He was tapped into something else, right? You can call it the collective, right? And in that state, there's like something else guiding you. Not something weird, but it's like, wait, it's like if you ever had the experience where you think of someone and they phone you. Right?
Yeah.
What is that? We have lots of experiments like with twins and stuff, having experience. There's some other, even what's it called in quantum physics, where they separate the two particles and they have the same quantum entanglement. It's quantum entanglement. Like this, we're starting to touch on.
Yeah.
But if I can be in that, flow state, I think diminishes a little bit. But if I can be in that state of no mind, the awareness state, there's actually, I can go, oh, I just know what to do. And it's very strange because where I had to learn a lot, it's crossing that abyss. Like I was in times in my life where they were very scary. I might not, financially I was struggling. And my logical brain wanted to survive. Okay, I wanted to apply all the things I need to apply in order to make money, right?
Yeah.
To go out and work hard and grind and do this stuff. And then I was in this deep practice. It's like, wait a minute, maybe there's another way to operate. And to let go from the perspective of the mind is irresponsible.
Yeah.
Let's go, wait a minute. You're not going to panic here and go out and rush and do this stuff? That's irresponsible. All it knew, it already had conclusions of what would happen.
Yeah.
Right? Now, outside of that, there's a whole different reality, I would say. It's like, if I can get from this fear state into this other state, it's like I just knew what to do. And it was even beyond that, not knowing what to do. I didn't have to do anything, which sounds very, very weird from our context.
And it's, so you're literally, you're describing the book that I'm working on, right? Between worlds or between states, because it's that, it's the, I call it this is how it feels for me, like the exhaustion in that between state of, okay, yeah, maybe there's financial things, there's just, let's just call it modern day mind and worry and anxiety kind of scenario. But then your practices and your higher beliefs and those guiding systems and your whatever's guiding you is bringing you down a different path. And I find maybe you're on the other side of this or given your work, but most people are just touching on that other state, right? And then you kind of come back, and then it's the oscillation part that I feel like we need a better bridge there to help make that a little bit. I don't think you delete it, at least in my conversations with these past teachers that I've been having.
I love what you're doing. It's so cool.
It's not about removing that between space, but it's just being able to operate there with more ease, knowing that place is actually the journey
Hmm.
in
Yeah, it's like
in a way.
yeah, it's like in Buddhism they say, in Zen they say like yes and, right?
Yeah.
And there's this quote that's like, what you do before enlightenment, right?
Mm.
You carry water and chop wood. Okay, so what you do after enlightenment, you carry water and chop wood,
Yeah.
right? There's still a human having its life, right?
Yeah.
But the nature of human function is suffering, which is what they say in Buddhism, right?
Yeah.
But you start to realize, wait, there's suffering happening, and I don't have to identify with it, and then things shift. But
Mm.
I also think it's important to say that there's not one being in one state or place in the journey is better than another.
Yeah.
I coach people who are just like, hey, I went through this breakup, or I lost my company, or I just retired, or whatever it is, and it's like, I just want to get through this. Like, okay, great, let's get through it.
Yeah.
Yes, I try and drop breadcrumbs that there might be something else, but it's like I see it as like someone's, in a scary forest or something, and I'm like, hey, take my arm, I'll walk with
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll walk you out of the forest if you want, but if you want to stay in the forest, I'll walk with you. I'll walk alongside you. And that's what you and I do. When we coach people, guide people, we're like, hey, take my hand, I got you. Like, let's
Yeah.
help you. Let's help you where you're at exactly now. It's like you have to climb. You're in a hole. You have to climb out of it. Okay, I'm not going to talk about you sitting on a beach sipping a martini, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to
Yeah.
let's figure out getting out this hole. Let's deal with that right now. That's your reality right now. And I'm not going to belittle it by saying, hey, just ignore it. It's not real, right?
Yeah. But I think that's it's so valuable, and it's just knowing, because it's interesting, even in the research I'm doing, I'll use language like, some of the fundamental like research questions around even saying between selves. And if I have a conversation with someone from the Eastern world or one of the Eastern teachers, often they'll start with saying, well, there actually is no self, but in and then we get into the conversation.
Mm,
And I always kind of chuckle, because I actually understand that. But to your point of,
mm,
if someone just needs comfort in the forest right now, we can't jump too far. It's just it's too far of a jump right now, I think, in terms of
mm,
where we're at, to
mm,
being okay with these principles or concepts or way of living and thinking that
yeah,
feel so far from
yeah.
our current reality. So I wonder, is that where, like, if I think of the work that you're doing now, and even going through your own evolution and personal journey through the ceremonies and medicines and all the ancient wisdom, is that where you're landing right now, is almost like a bridge between worlds
Mm.
in a way?
Yeah, that's exactly how I describe it. Like, I straddle both worlds. I can speak
Yeah.
the language of both worlds. And so wherever you are, whatever you're ready for, we'll have that conversation. And
Yeah.
it's not that I have a objective to cross you over the abyss. I
Yeah.
can describe it. I'm like, hey, there is this option over here, right? Or there's
Yeah.
that option there. But wherever you want to be, that's fine. You
Yeah.
know, and I don't have an agenda at all. The agenda is only to be a support, to
Mm,
be, where can I, help you the best? Where can I be the most support in your life right now?
yeah. We're running up on time, which I'm not surprised. It just, we blew through that. We'll definitely have to have another continuation to this conversation, as I feel like we're just scratching the surface. But I do have two questions I kind of just surfaced as we've been speaking. If you think of, and you don't have to name any names or tribes or anything like that, but if you think of a shaman that you've learned a lot from, or you really respect, if I had that individual on the show right now and asked them the question, "Who are you?" How do you think they would respond to that question?
I'm thinking of one, and I think it's everything crosses over. But I'm hearing, like, if I imagine his voice, it would be like, whoever you want to be, whoever
Mm,
you have decided, conscious or unconscious,
yeah.
that's who you are. It's like that saying, whether you believe it or you don't, it's true.
Wow. Wow. Is there anyone you would suggest that I research within this realm that's have passed, that they don't even have to be a physical being? They could be someone that's well written about or discussed in, a spirit world, or a guide, or someone that. But I would just love to have a bit of a flavor of the world that you've been experiencing and bring it into the book in some capacity.
I think there's a lot that aren't written about. It's like, this shaman in Gabon, that I was just with. No one's written about him, but
Yeah.
what he's doing is unbelievable. And I say
Yeah.
unbelievable, I mean that unbelievable from the context of this scientific world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's have it. We'll have another conversation about that. I feel like there could be something we can work on together to bring some of that to light. Because I think it's so important. In the lens of what we did with the other series of respect and deep appreciation for the work and just I would say the wisdom transfer that a lot of the shamans and elders and so forth continue to do, that is a big part that's missing, I think, in a lot of our culture. And I'm seeing it as well in navigating that between space where how powerful, ceremony and community is and so forth. And we just don't have a lot of that.
No.
And then we get to this point where it feels like we hit a massive wall.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Right?
that's sort of like that container I was talking about. Their ceremony and ritual keeps the container intact.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, last question for you, Paul. What's got you smiling, as you think of the next 6 months or so? What's putting a smile on your face?
What puts a smile, I would also say, it like lights me up, energetically. I've been very lucky in what I get to do, and so there's amazing collaborations and events that I get to work with, and I get to work with some people who are very high achievers in one context, like in this this world, this Western world we live in, and I get to work with incredible people. And so I get, lectures and events and, one-on-ones and that stuff. Whenever anyone gets the aha, oh, wow.
Oh yeah.
Okay. That's what lights me up. Like when people
Yeah.
get touched by something on a very deep level. So all
Yeah.
these things allow me to do that. And that's what lights me up.
That's beautiful. Well, I, for one, Paul, am really grateful that you stayed on your path, and especially in those dark moments, made the decisions that you did, and that you're blessing us with the work that you're putting out into the world and following your own curiosity and listening to the guidance of being open and dropping, preconceived notions and judgments and ways of living and thinking in the Western world, so that you can come back and help guide us into this, act as that bridge into this beautiful other worlds, essentially. That, man, that, like, to me, it strikes the same chords as if I think back in modern history, or at least the last 100 years or so, when people would say we're going to put someone on the moon, and it's like the impossible is being reached in some, and it just fires up, a human being in a different way. Like what you talk about and what you've experienced and what at least shared with me and on the show is that like 1,000 times that. It's just so interesting to me. So
Yeah,
thank
and
you.
to me too, man. Like
Yeah.
I've been on the same journey. It's like, oh, like every time I go through push through one of those walls, like, oh, it disappeared. What's there? So
Yeah.
it's been an adventure. I'm so privileged to be able to go on that journey.
Where can we follow along as your journey continues? Where's the best place to
I think
stay in touch?
I think through I think on my website, I do like new bi-weekly newsletters and stuff, so you can keep up with me there. And there's some social media stuff which you can all get it through my website, paulmvincent.com.
Perfect.
And I think that's probably the best central location.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, brother, and to be continued.
Yeah, I loved it. Thank you so much for having me.
Are you ready to unlock your creativity and transform your passion for beauty into a career? Southeastern College is here to help you take your first steps towards training for a career in cosmetology. Unlock your potential and start your path towards a career making people feel confident. It's time to invest in yourself. Visit sec.edu for more information on our programs and take the first step toward training for a brand new career in cosmetology. Your before and after story starts now at Southeastern College.